Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started now. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for today. If you haven't seen me before, haven't seen any of our webinars before, I'm a cloud solutions architect from Massdriver. Massdriver is a visual internal developer platform that enables engineers and developers to deploy production-ready infrastructure and applications in minutes. During our webinar, our CEO, Chris Hill, a co-founder of Massdriver, among other of my coworkers, will be in the chat and in Q&A rooms answering any and all questions. So today, we will be talking about a feature we have at Massdriver called Diffing. So we'll cover diffing bundle histories, which includes looking at who made changes, when those changes were made, and what was changed. We'll also cover diffing environments. Diffing environments allows you to compare the configurations of all of your environments within a project. So before we dive into talking about the feature, let's cover some of the terminology that I'll be using a bit during the webinar. Diffing is a way to compare and contrast two things together, two entities together. Environments are the workspace that a Massdriver bundle will be deployed to. Massdriver doesn't enforce any governance about how you design your environments. Environments can be modeled by application stage, like production, staging, development, by region, by customer, and even ephemerally per developer. All right, let's switch over to Massdriver here. Let's look at this deployment that I already have up and running in Massdriver. This is a 3-tier web architecture up and running using Kubernetes. And I have deployed this app into 2 different environments, dev and production. This is my development environment. As we can see, my application, which is a rock, paper, scissors game, is up and running. But if I switch over to my production environment, I'm going to see that my application is not up and running. It's actually failed. It's failed to deploy, and we're going to look at the error message. So the error message is telling me timed out, waiting for the condition. Now, this is a vague Kubernetes error message. And what this basically refers to is that it timed out waiting for the deployment to take place. Let's pretend that I don't know what this error message is referring to. What I want to do is take you into the Azure console to kind of show you how you might normally figure out what the problem is if you didn't have Massdriver. So I'm going to switch to the Azure console here. This is my subscription where I have all of my resources deployed. And we are just going to search for my production cluster. Okay, here's my production Kubernetes cluster. And what I want to do now is look in the namespaces field here. And as we can see, I don't have permissions to view this page. I'm an owner of the subscription. I'm a global administrator to the entry tenant, and I can't view inside Kubernetes. That's because I need to be given explicit Kubernetes permissions. So let's go ahead and set that up. Per the documentation, I need to add a role to my account. So we'll go into access control, and we'll just add a role assignment. We're going to look for the Kubernetes cluster admin role. And then we're going to search for my user. Click select, review and assign. Okay, so this will take a minute to propagate. While we're waiting, I did want to mention that we do have more webinars coming up. Next week, our CEO, Corey O'Daniel, will be going over how to upgrade your Postgres database version with minimal downtime. And on August 30th, our COO, Chris Hill, will host a webinar on debugging Kubernetes applications, just like I'm trying to do right here, but we'll do it in a much more efficient way. All right, so let's go ahead and check again for namespaces. I still don't have permissions. So even the documentation isn't clear on exactly what I need to do to access my cluster. I'm going to go ahead and add another permission here. And this is going to be the RBAC cluster admin. So we're going to add that role. Again, we're going to search for myself, select, review and assign, and add. So again, this will take a minute to propagate. As you can see, if you were to go and manage a Kubernetes cluster within Azure or any other cloud console like AWS, GCP, you are inundated with lots of options and pages to click through. Not only do you need the permissions to be able to view and modify those configurations, but you really need to be an expert about what's going on in your cloud account to figure out like how to best manage it. All right, let's go ahead and click namespaces again. We'll try to refresh the whole page. This normally does take a minute or so to propagate. So what we're going to be looking for here when this actually loads up is we're going to be looking at a list of events for the Kubernetes cluster. It's going to show us a long list of events, basically describing everything that went right and everything that went wrong. And what we're going to be specifically looking for is what might have caused the issue with deploying a Kubernetes cluster app. Let's go ahead and refresh again. Okay, so we're getting some workloads there. That's good. Okay, now we see our namespaces. So the namespace is what I want to search for. Now, if I switch back into my Massdriver console and click configure on my application, we can see that my application deployed to the default namespace right here. So what I want to do is open up the default namespace and let this load up for a second, and then we'll click events. And now this is going to tell us all the events that have been happening with the Kubernetes cluster. And the first one that I can see, no nodes available, 0 of 1, and inefficient CPU. Okay, so now I've finally figured out what the problem is. We're having an issue with the CPU. There has to be an easier way to see why my dev environment is up and running, working perfectly, but production isn't. At Massdriver, we have a way. I'll go ahead and switch to Massdriver here. So the first thing that we can check is the bundle history. On every one of our bundles, we have a history button. And if I click it, it's going to show us a history of our deployments. So the bundle deployment history gives us the full history for each deployment for each bundle. This history shares with us the person who deployed, when it was deployed, and the outcome of that deployment. We can diff these deployments using this diff button in the top right-hand corner to see what was changed. Let's diff the most recent deployment, which is the failed one, with our most recent successful deployment. And we'll hit compare. All right, so what we're finding is the CPU, here it is, CPU requests. So what happened was I received a lot of reports from users that my app was acting slowly. So my initial response was to bump up the CPU. I wanted to make sure that the app was running efficiently for all of my users. And this change is actually what caused it to fail. Now, what I can do now is I'm going to close this out and the bundle history as well. We're going to compare our environments. I want to see how my production environment compares to my dev environment. And oops, I'm going to switch back here. So this button in the bottom right-hand corner, it's the exact same diff icon. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And then here we can compare environments. I'm going to compare dev to production. And we're going to look for our CPU usage. So as we can see, in my dev AKS cluster, I am requesting 0.5 CPU. And in my production cluster, my app is requesting 2.5. If we look at the AKS cluster SKUs, we're going to see that we're using different SKUs. So if I close out of here and click configure on my AKS cluster, I'm requesting 4 vCores and 16 gigabytes of memory. And if I switch over to development, we're going to see what SKU we're using here. And it's actually 2 vCores and 4 gigabytes of memory. So what this means is I'm using more resources than my cluster can allow because of all the other services running in the cluster. I boosted up my app's resources, but I didn't first add resources to my production AKS cluster. I'm going to go ahead and revert my change for now. We're going to set that back to 1 and redeploy. Now, the best path forward would be for me to essentially elevate the SKU of my AKS cluster to allow more resources, but that'll take a little bit longer than webinar's sake. So for today, I'm just going to revert my change and redeploy. While we wait for the app to redeploy, I did want to mention that we do have a community Slack available for anyone to join. I'll post that link in the chat here. So the community Slack is available for everyone to join, customer or not. We are aiming to build a community of engineers, developers, and enthusiasts who maybe want to know more about Massdriver or are already using Massdriver and might need some help. Members of Massdriver are in the Slack as well, so feel free to pop in and say hi. Okay, so that's going to take a minute to deploy. I'll go ahead and switch back to my slide here. So to recap, we experienced an issue with deploying our AKS cluster application after bumping up the resources. We painstakingly went through the Azure console to determine what was wrong. We then used the Massdriver diff of our deployment history and environments to compare what our successful deployments looked like versus our failed deployments, and then also what our dev environment looked like that had the application up and running versus our production environment that did not. And then lastly, we deployed a fix to our AKS cluster application. All right, so this actually concludes our webinar. I realized that it was very short today. I hope you won't be mad for not taking up the full hour. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be sticking around to chat with the audience, answer any questions. If you are interested in learning more about Massdriver, please check out massdriver.cloud.